On the morning of June 23, 1780, roughly 6,000 British and Hessian soldiers stepped off from Elizabethtown, New Jersey, in two long columns, and nearly every officer among them expected the day to be short. At their head rode a Hessian general named Wilhelm von Knyphausen, 63 years old, hardened in the Prussian army of Frederick the Great, a man who had spent 4 decades learning how professional armies broke amateurs. Ahead of him lay a few miles of road, a shallow river, a village called Springfield, and beyond it the mountain passes that opened onto George Washington's hungry, half-mutinous army. On paper, nothing stood in the way. What actually stood in the way was a thin line of men most of Europe had already dismissed as farmers playing at soldiers. By nightfall, it was Knyphausen's professionals who were marching backward. This is not the battle anyone remembers. It has no monument on the scale of Bunker Hill, no crossing painted for a museum wall, no surrender ceremony staged for a rotunda, and yet the fight over one small New Jersey town did something that none of the celebrated battles of that year managed to do. It convinced the most powerful empire on earth to give up trying to win the war in the North at all. To see why that mattered, you have to see how badly the cause was losing. 6 weeks earlier, on May 12th, Charleston had fallen. More than 5,000 American troops, an entire Southern army under General Benjamin Lincoln, had marched out and grounded their muskets in the largest surrender the United States would endure in the entire war. The war's weight was sliding south, and in the north, what remained of the Continental Army sat in the hills above Morristown, unpaid, underfed, and close enough to breaking that a month earlier, 2 Connecticut regiments had shouldered their weapons and started marching home before their own officers talked them down. Knyphausen's spies told him all of it. They told him the Jersey loyalists were waiting to rise, that the rebel army was a starving shell, that one hard shove would collapse the whole northern front. He believed them. He had good reason to. He was, by every account, a serious man. In an army full of aristocrats who treated the war as a season abroad, Knyphausen was austere, devout, and almost monkish about his habits. It was said around New York's dinner tables that the old general spread butter on his bread with his thumb, unbothered by what polite company thought of it. He had commanded Hessians at the taking of Fort Washington, where thousands of Americans surrendered in an afternoon. He had set this campaign in motion while General Clinton was still away at Charleston, holding New York in his absence, and he meant to use the opening, even now that Clinton had returned to the city. This was not a fool blundering into a trap. This was one of the most competent professional soldiers on the continent, acting on the best information he had. The man waiting for him had learned war a different way. Nathanael Greene had been raised a Quaker in Rhode Island, put to work at his family's iron forge, and taught that fighting was a sin. And he had been formally read out of his Quaker meeting for the crime of walking to a militia muster. He had no military schooling. He had a stiff knee that left him with a limp, pronounced enough that some officers had once doubted whether he belonged in a command role at all. What he had instead was books. He had taught himself the art of war out of borrowed volumes by candlelight, one forge worker's evening at a time. By the summer of 1780, he was among the few men Washington trusted without reservation, and when the blow came at Springfield, it was Greene who was handed the forward defense. A few thousand men, most of them the very militia and Continentals Knyphausen had been promised would never stand. Whether they would stand came down to a single decision Greene was about to make, one that looked to anyone reading a map like the wrong one. The decision looked on its face like a general quitting the field before the fight began. Greene had perhaps 1,500 Continental regulars, thickened by militia companies still coming in from the surrounding farms, a few thousand men on his best hour against Knyphausen's 6,000 professionals and their artillery. Every conventional instinct said to gather that force, set it in front of Springfield, and make the British bleed for the town. Greene did the opposite. He resolved, in effect, not to defend Springfield at all, not with his main body. He would surrender the town if it came to that. What he would not surrender was the ground behind it. That instinct had been bought at a terrible price 4 years earlier. In 1776, a younger Greene had argued to hold Fort Washington on the Hudson. It fell in a single afternoon, and nearly 3,000 Americans marched into captivity on his advice. He had carried that afternoon with him ever since. He had learned the hardest way a soldier can, not to pour an army into ground it could not keep. And this time he was not guessing. Only 2 weeks earlier, the British had come up this very corridor toward Connecticut farms and been turned back. A probe that cost the countryside a village and the minister's wife her life. But that handed Greene something priceless, a rehearsal. He had watched exactly how the columns moved, which roads they used, how far they could get before the militia closed on their flanks. When the second blow came, he already knew its shape. Knyphausen was marching into a script Greene had read once already. So pay attention to the shape of the land here, because the whole battle lived inside it. Springfield sat at the foot of the Watchung Mountains, the long, low ridge that Washington had leaned on for years as a natural fortress wall, a barrier that shielded the army's camps from the open coastal plain where British numbers and cavalry ruled. Directly behind the town was a single notch in that ridge, the Hobart Gap, the one practical road through the hills to Washington's encampment at Morristown. Everything Knyphausen wanted lay on the far side of that gap. The winter cantonment, the supply magazines, the fragile, half-starved army itself. Everything Greene had to protect was the gap. The town in front of it was not the prize. The town was bait. From that one fact, Greene built a trap out of geography and arithmetic. He kept his main line back on the high ground where it sat astride the gap and could not be flanked. And he refused to be drawn forward off of it, no matter what happened below. The mountains did half his work. A defender on that slope could hold against numbers that would have overwhelmed him in the open. Then he fed the fight in pieces. 2 roads ran into Springfield from the east, and both crossed the shallow Rhode River on bridges. The main road straight through the town, and the Vauxhall Road, looping in from the north. Knyphausen divided his force to come on by both. Greene answered each with a fraction of his strength. At the main bridge, he placed Colonel Israel Angel and the 2nd Rhode Island Regiment, fewer than 200 men, and told them to hold a river crossing against a column of thousands. On the Vauxhall Road to the north, he sent Major Henry Lee, the cavalryman they called Light Horse Harry, with his dragoons and a thin screen of infantry to do the same. Between and around them, General Philemon Dickinson's New Jersey militia filtered into the orchards and the standing wheat, and these were not reluctant men, nor slow ones. Along the crest of the Watchungs ran a chain of beacon fires, a signal system built to turn the whole countryside out at the first sight of a redcoat column light the ridge, and within hours farmers were shouldering muskets for miles around. So when Knyphausen stepped off from Elizabethtown, he was not marching against a few scattered companies. He was marching against a militia that could summon itself faster than he could advance, made of men with a grievance that had a name, a face, and a fresh grave 2 weeks old at Connecticut farms. Every part of the design asked the forward men to do something close to suicidal, to stand at the water's edge, bleed the columns as they crossed, give ground only by the yard, and buy Greene his minutes. It asked 200 Rhode Islanders to trade a bridge for time against artillery they could not answer gun for gun. And it asked all of it to funnel 6,000 British and Hessian troops toward a mountain notch, where their numbers, their discipline, and their cannon would count for far less than they did on open ground. On a map, Greene had thrown away a town and broken his little army into scattered handfuls. In truth, he had already chosen exactly where this battle would be decided, and it was not going to be at Springfield. To Knyphausen, none of this looked like a trap. It looked like the last push against an enemy already coming apart. He had, after all, tested this very road before. 2 weeks earlier, he had marched out along nearly the same line toward Connecticut farms, and the day had gone badly. The militia had swarmed, the advance had stalled, and he had drawn back without breaking through. A cautious man might have read that afternoon as a warning. Knyphausen read it as an accident. Everything he believed about the larger war told him the rebels were finished. Charleston gone, 5,000 men taken prisoner, the Continentals starving in the hills, and mutinous enough that their own regiments had marched off in protest a month before. His agents swore New Jersey's loyalists were only waiting for a show of force to come out into the open. One more push, in real strength this time, and the war in the north was over. So he pushed, and the warnings kept arriving, and he kept setting them down. The loyalists did not rise, the road stayed empty of the friendly faces he had been promised. The militia did not scatter, it thickened. He rides toward Springfield, expecting an open road and a broken enemy. And what gathers on his flanks instead is the armed population of an entire county, men with a fresh grievance who know every fence and orchard by heart. Still he came on. The plan was sound, the intelligence was good. It was reality that refused to cooperate. The first real check came at the water. At the main bridge over the Rahway, Angel's 200 Rhode Islanders opened on the head of the column and did not stop. By every reasonable expectation, they should have been brushed aside in minutes. They were not. The British brought their guns forward and hammered the crossing. And the Rhode Islanders answered from behind whatever cover the riverbank gave them, firing and reloading into a mass of men many times their number. They held far longer than a force that size had any business holding, trading the bridge one volley at a time while the column stacked up behind it, unable to pour across. It nearly killed the regiment. As the British pressure built, Hessian troops began working along the river to find a way across and around, and the 200 men at the bridge came within a breath of being surrounded where they stood. The order to fall back reached them just as the jaws were closing. They went rearward, still fighting, contesting the town street by street, and when the count was taken, something close to a quarter of Angel's men were dead or wounded. 200 had walked into that fight. They had bled by the dozen to buy Greene his hours, and the hours were exactly what mattered. It was somewhere in this fight, as the American cartridge boxes ran empty, that the war's most quotable legend was born. The story goes that James Caldwell, the same Presbyterian minister whose wife had been shot at Connecticut farms, came running from a nearby church with an armload of hymn books, tore them apart, and flung the pages to the men to ram down their muskets for wadding, shouting, "Give 'em Watts, boys!" a pun on Isaac Watts, whose hymns filled the torn leaves. Whether it happened quite that way, or at this battle, or the earlier one, no one can prove. It survived regardless because it distilled exactly what the day felt like. A whole community throwing everything it owned, down to its hymnals, at a professional army. To the north, on the Vauxhall Road, Lee's men were doing the same grim work at the second bridge, holding the flanking column, denying it the quick loop around Greene's flank. And behind all of it, on the high ground before the gap, Greene's main line simply would not move. Knyphausen looks up at those heights and sees the shape of the thing at last. The road to Morristown runs through a mountain notch held by fresh troops he cannot outflank, and every hour his columns have spent fighting for a village has only bought that line more time and more men. The gap would not be forced. It had never truly been on offer. What was left to him was the town. Unable to break through, the British and Hessians pressed into Springfield itself, and when they pulled back, they put it to the torch. Of the town's 40-odd buildings, the accounts say only a handful were still standing when the smoke cleared. Then the whole force turned east to march back the way it had come, and even that was not clean. The retreat became a running fight. The same militia that had thickened on Knyphausen's flanks all morning now dogged him the whole way back, firing from the tree lines and the fences, harrying the columns across the miles to Elizabethtown and the boats that carried them that night and after, back to the safety of Staten Island. It did not come again. That was the sum of it. 6,000 of the best drilled soldiers on the continent had set out to shatter the Continental army and open the road north. And they had won a burned village and nothing else. No gap, no Morristown, no uprising, no war-ending blow. It was the last major offensive Britain would ever launch in the northern states. Lay the plan out on paper, stop an empire's army with 200 men at a bridge, a minister's hymnals, and a county full of furious farmers, and no serious officer alive would have believed it could hold. Look closely at what Greene actually did, because it is easy to lose under the smoke. He did not fight the battle Knyphausen came to fight. He refused that battle and fought a different one on ground of his own choosing. He turned a notch in the mountains into a wall no column could climb. He turned a town into bait and spent it on purpose. He turned 200 Rhode Islanders into an afternoon, and that afternoon into the end of an empire's war in the north. 6,000 professionals had marched out certain of a fight they could not lose, and Greene beat them by never once giving them that fight. The consequences ran far past a single June day. Knyphausen's retreat across the water to Staten Island effectively closed the book on major British operations in the northern states. From that summer on, the war's center of gravity belonged to the south. and Clinton turned his full weight in that direction. But here is the part that turns a forgotten skirmish into something larger. The mine that stopped Knyphausen at Springfield did not stay in New Jersey. Within months, Greene was sent to take over the wrecked American effort in the Carolinas, and there he ran the very same idea at the scale of an entire campaign: give ground, refuse the decisive battle, march the enemy until his strength bled out of him, trade space for time until the arithmetic finally turned. He never won a clean standing victory in the South. He did not need one. He wore Cornwallis's army down until it staggered out of the Carolinas altogether and into Virginia, into the closing trap at a little tobacco port called Yorktown, where in the autumn of 1781, the war Britain could no longer win in the North was lost for good in the South. The logic that ended the revolution was, in miniature, the logic Greene had used to save a mountain gap. Springfield was the first place it worked. Today you can drive through Springfield in a few minutes and never know. It is an ordinary New Jersey suburb now, houses and traffic where the columns once stacked up at the river. A monument marks the fight for anyone who slows down to read it, and one of the few structures that outlived the burning still stands. The old Cannonball House, remembered ever since for the mark a British round is said to have left in its wall, a small scar carried by a building that watched an empire turn around and go home. The town that Greene was willing to lose is still there. The Northern War that Britain wanted is not. That is the strange arithmetic of Springfield. The battle nobody put on a monument wall did what the famous ones could not. It made the strongest army in the world decide the North was not worth the cost. It was won by a Quaker who taught himself war from books, 200 men who would not leave a bridge, a preacher with an armful of hymnals, and a county that refused to be conquered on its own ground. If this is the first you've heard of the day Britain's last push north died at a burning New Jersey village, subscribe. This channel lives on exactly these overlooked turning points, the battles that decided everything and got remembered by no one. Give the video a like if Nathanael Greene earned a little more of your attention today than he had this morning, and tell me in the comments, which forgotten battle do you think changed the war more than the famous one everybody names? I read them, and the best ones become the next scripts.